those examples that are held up as the leading and most democratic countries on our continent is a reality where the people have been moved to the periphery of the democratic process. People only have a peripheral link with the process. And this is showing in terms of the outcomes that we are getting. We are getting outcomes that are serving a tiny elite that is located at the center of our political processes and marginalizing the vast majority of our citizens. And when I say people have been moved to the periphery of the process, I mean that we have been made to understand that our task is to register to vote and to show up once every 5 years and cast our votes, and we go back home. And the whole intervening period is a theater at which we sit on the terraces and we see true monkey business playing out in our parliaments and different forums where this tiny elite sits. So I want to try and suggest that part of the challenges that are confronting us is that we look at democracy as an election process. We look at it as a process at which the electoral process is the most significant, and sometimes we even look at it as the only determinant factor. Whereas democracy, the reality is that there is selection before election. And I think most of the problems that are confronting us come from the selection process, because the selection process is a closed process. If we take the American system, which is very similar, and I understand to a large extent to the Kenyan system, my wife is Kenyan, so I am half Kenyan myself, and I understand how we do our politics here. Money is at the center of the selection process. 2.5% of the large donors in America are the ones who determine whether one can make it to be a candidate for a major political party before the majority of the citizenry is offered candidates to then elect from. Here in Kenya, it's also extremely difficult for one to make it to become a candidate if those with the money don't invest in you. So money is a key factor in rigging and distorting the selection that happens before an election takes place. But you also have violence. And you have violence not just in terms of inter-party violence, you have intra-party violence. There's a study that was done in Zimbabwe that looked at why very few female candidates made it to be the candidates for political parties that were running. And it was clear that the internal political party selection process itself required those who were thuggish enough to go through it. So most women ended up running as independents because you could not succeed through the intensive, violent selection process that determined who then becomes a candidate. And on top of that, you do have state repression that also plays a role in distorting that whole process. So I think we cannot underestimate this selection that happens before an election if we want to rescue the notion of democracy. These days, I'm tempted a lot to go back to the Athenian roots of democracy. And the notion of democracy we have today, the representative notion of democracy, goes back to Athens. And there, the way that elections took place was that if you were a citizen and you were willing to be a representative, you threw your name in a hat and they'll shake around those names and they'll pick a name the same way that you pick names in a jackpot process. And I want to argue today that if we were to have such a lottery system of democracy, we'll be having better candidates and better representatives emerge, because we'll have equalized this selection process that is rigged to favor those who have money, those who can be thuggish enough, those who control the cohesive apparatus of our state and our society and structures of our communities. So the jackpot lottery system that supermarkets are using to determine who wins a car, who wins a hamper and all of that, can deliver better results than what we are getting now. And I also wanted to throw something else. We've allowed representative democracy to be the mechanism of governance in areas that it is least suited for, particularly at the local level. At the local level, this is where citizen participation, active citizen participation and engagement, this is where citizenship must manifest and express itself. Yet today, again at the local level, we are showing up once every 5 years, elect someone who then goes to represent us on affairs of development at a local level. And I think that's where we have a major anomaly. In the example that I will share in terms of our experience in Zimbabwe, one of our biggest insights right now is to say we need to move to direct democracy at the local level. And we need to unpack what direct democracy means. Because direct democracy means you are there every day, it means everyone, and it means participation in everything that matters in the affairs of a community. It's not a once in a 5 years process. It's not a once in a 2 years process. It's every day, it's everyone, it's everything that matters. Then there's something else that I want to mention before I get into our experience. And this is something that has been troubling me. To say how as a people, as a civilization, how have we found ourselves in this situation where we vote for promises and not a record? That's where our crisis is. We are voting for a promise and not a record. If you go to your communities, there are those who are working every day to make sure that there is a functioning neighborhood watch. Maybe people come together, they fix potholes, young people have mentors, there's different programs that are really creating a solid record of contribution to the affairs of a community and public service. Yet those are not the people that we vote for. We vote for people with gloss manifestos and 30 promises. If you vote for me, I will, I shall, I will. And we've done it for decades. I'm hoping in the elections that are going to come, it can be a resounding slogan that says, don't vote for a promise, vote for a record. Before you can demonstrate a record of impacting lives in your community other than your own life, even a record of how you have impacted your family, the street where you live in, the neighborhood where you come from. If you cannot demonstrate such a record, you've got no business offering yourself for public office. Whether you are young, whether you are a woman, whether you are some of these issues that we are talking about. Demonstrate a record, and that should be the qualifying parameter for election. My comrade here, Brian Kagoro, always talks about how, because we are ignoring all these factors, we've now created a system that elevates mediocrity to the point of sanctity. And it's mostly the mediocre amongst our communities who are so quick to come up with promises and so quick to come up with all of these issues that are distorting our democratic process. So let me switch a little bit and talk about our experience. So I convene a national citizens movement called the Citizens Manifesto. And it has its roots in 2016. And this was a moment when we had a series of wildcat protests that rocked the country. There were protests that involved commuter drivers, vendors, unemployed university graduates, mining communities. It was a moment of a generalized discontent and crisis in the country. And it is the period that we saw the emergence of the hashtag movements. Hash this flag, those who remember, hash this gown, hash Tajamuka, hash vendors. We had like a dozen of hashtags that emerged. And it was not accidental. This was the first time that you had such a massive expression of generalized citizenry discontent in the age of much more affordable smartphones, much more affordable data. In Zimbabwe, we have more than 100% cell phone penetration. So there are more mobile phones than people in the country. It was the age of Twitter. So you could have just one guy with a smartphone that has ability to take photos and videos, recording, sending that message, and overnight that becomes the trending conversation. And some were very quick to christen this as the rise of new social movements in Zimbabwe. And in an almost satirical twist, donors, because I also wear a hat coming from a foundation with my work with Trust Africa, donors were quick to create funds for social movements. And I remember meeting one of the donors calling me 6 months later to say, look, we've created this fund for social movements, but we can't find them anymore. Because they'd taken trending hashtags, they'd taken a protest moment to be a movement. And 6 months later, they were sitting with budget lines that were not moving. And our experience has been an experience of saying, how do you turn a protest moment into a movement, into a sustained movement for political change? That has been our experience. So our intervention in that process was to create platforms for sustained deliberative dialogue. So starting weekly would bring together different people who had shown initiative and were involved in different processes and have a hardcore conversation to say, comrades, don't get this overnight celebrity that you now have because your Twitter numbers have gone to 15,000, 20,000, 30,000. Don't let it go into your head, because there's no movement that is composed of one person and 1 million likes or 100,000 likes on Twitter. So we started to have very difficult conversations amongst ourselves. What are we experiencing? What are we seeing? And how can we build this into a movement? And when we started that conversation, the first thing that occurred was to realize that it was not sufficient to be angry and articulate about things that we did not want. Our bigger task, our more involved task, was to actually build consensus on a guiding star, and that being the dream that we'd all share, the dream of a better Zimbabwe for all that we could all share in. So we actually took several steps back. My sister from Kenya spoke this morning to say sometimes the way to move forward is to take those steps back to go and find out where you dropped your capital. We took those steps back and we went into a process of developing a shared vision for a better Zimbabwe for all. And we developed 13 cardinal pillars, and these were very consultative processes. It took us over a year, consulting in small meetings in different towns and harnessing participatory approaches, because we could not be talking in the same old way that suffocates voice and allows only a few voices to be heard. So we sat down until we developed what we've now called the Citizens Manifesto. So the first V in our story is a V around a vision, building consensus about the future that we want. It's a 13 cardinal pillar vision that starts with the question of servant leadership. So leadership must be there to serve people, not the other way around. And the second of our cardinal pillars is informed active citizenship. And it boils down to the point I mentioned earlier on: everyone, every day, everything that matters in our community. And they go on, it's 13 points that we came up with. And immediately we realized that as we were working on the vision, that we needed to take another step back and have a conversation about values. Because if we did not have a common set of values that could hold us together as a glue, and upon which we would then build our own activism and our own engagement, it was proving that it would be fruitless. Because, again, we're at a culture where there was massive deterioration in the traditions, in the discipline, in the culture of civil society. So we had to take a step back again. And one of the things that emerged in our conversation on values was the question of solidarity. Like, why is it now that we are so happy to demonstrate that we are a platform that has 670 civil society organizations? And you go into a small little community, it's like, dozens and dozens of organizations, and then no one works with anyone else. Everyone is working alone. Everyone is so individualized. If something befalls you, you are on your own. So we realized that the glue that had kept our movements together and allowed us to move forward and allowed us to attain victories that continue to inspire us today in the past solidarity was at the center of that. And we realized that the fiber of solidarity is relationships. We needed to build relationships amongst each other, and we needed to be there in action when something happens. And we've practiced this. Some of you will remember when nurses were on strike in Harare. We went to the town square, created all these boxes, invited the generality of citizens to come in, because the vice president had threatened to fire nurses for going on strike. And they were all writing profound emotional letters on why the government needed to respond in a different way to the plight of the nurses. And the next day, the nurses set up their own tables there, and they were taking, I don't know medical language, but they were checking your BP, they were checking your temperature, they were giving medical advice for free, right in the middle of the city. And there are relationships that were built from that time that continue to be part of our growing movement today. So very, very practical. So solidarity emerged as a very important thing in relationships, inclusivity, accountability, and most importantly, participation, especially participation of those who are most affected by the issues that we are working on. And I'll transition again and say, when we put solidarity into practice, we found ourselves going local. A lot of our organizing today is at a local level, but that's not how we imagined this at the beginning. At the beginning, we just thought it was bringing these different notable actors that had become prominent into a conversation and creating a generalized collective platform there. But when it became about solidarity, and I'll give you a practical example. One of the areas where we've done a lot of work is a mining site called Akshura's Mine. It has run from 1917, produced billions of dollars, and if you go there now, because this mine site is closed, or mostly closed, it's as if a nuclear bomb was dropped there. Workers are desperate, they're destitute, the environment is destroyed. The only clinic that existed there where women used to go and give birth, where chronic medicine was accessed, it's closed. Young people don't have opportunities. So our point of coming in was when the new owner of the mine had evicted mine workers and told them to move back to where they came from without paying their dues, without basically it was an issue that violated labor justice, which is one of our cardinal pillars. So we went in, and the first point of intervention was to say, no, we can't allow this dispersal to happen, because once it happens, some people are going to go back to Zambia, some to Malawi, some to their villages. Then there won't be any point or any hope of a fight. We created a tent by the side of the road so that people could sit there and camp there, because it was, again, the evictions were done during the rain season. After that, we all had to come together, just like what we do during funerals, where people move around with a plate and collect meal and cooking oil and salt and everything. We had to come together and mobilize resources so that these families could continue to eat whilst they fight their case in court. I remember at some point, once we mobilized resources that were enough to buy a beast so that these guys can be feeding. The chairperson of the committee that was organizing on the ground sent me a message on my SMS in Shona, my local language. And it's a message that said, Mapukuta misodzi yangairi pamoyo yedu, which translates to, you've wiped tears that were on our hearts. It's a poor translation because it can only be expressed in your mother tongue. But that's how profound it is. And that's how deep the relationships develop when you are engaged in solidarity on an active and practical, real felt issue at a community level. So we've continued to build there, and what we realized, and this just takes me to what's most exciting in terms of our experience right now, we immediately realized that this fragmentation that we keep talking about, to say neoliberalism by engendering individualism, it fragments our communities, it fragments our societies, and it undermines our ability to respond collectively. So when we went to the community, the next thing for us was to create what we now call community assemblies. So for this community, we created a community assembly where they keep coming together at least once every month. They've now developed, working groups that look at, okay, what are the issues that are most pressing in our community? And you can't even go there and say, we work on accountability, work on transparency, once the space is created, they want to talk about the issues that affect them. Sometimes it's about personal safety and security because people are getting mugged on their way to work, coming home. It's about the health question. It's about the opportunities for their young people. So sometimes the separation of politics and governance and civil liberties, it's only something that makes sense in our proposals as NGOs and in our conversations with donors. So we created these spaces where they have an open conversation that simply looks at what are the issues of shared concern in our communities. And then they go on to look at what can we work on together. And we've started to see that they are now becoming more connected. There's now relationships, there's now solidarity in these communities, and they are now able to work together collectively to address different issues. And what it has also brought to the fore for us is the importance of building capacities for community organizing, local community organizing, so that it's not taking anyone coming from outside, but the capacity is inherent in that community and it's nurtured and it's strengthened so that the community can continue to organize itself and continue to move forward like that. So we've also been involved in that level of capacity development. And the particular capacity that we've seen as relevant now is the capacity to hold conversations in a generative and different way. Where when you hold a meeting, it's not 3-4 experts seated in the front and everyone else is listening and doodling and doing something else. But people are sitting around small circles. People are using World Cafe. People are using open space. Those different methodologies really, really have an impact because they enable people to show up fully and to bring out, what they can contribute. And then I'll try and pace it up. The other piece that has come for us is to then realize that in doing this, there's a sense in which the community started to feel that conversations around governance was taking away time from their pursuit of livelihood issues. And you could actually feel the strain, people failing to show up and showing up, but they're really looking at their clock. So right now, where the conversation has reached is to say, how can we also begin to think about or integrate the aspect of reclaiming the economy at a local level in the conversations that we're having about politics, governance, democracy, and even community building. So we're beginning to talk a lot about cooperatives and about communitarian enterprises that can enable the community to also deal with the question of livelihood and the question of survival. So I'll wrap up by saying, so since 2016, we've organized 2 big conventions. We organized a National Citizens Convention last year. It got international profile because we brought people like Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General. He was the keynote speaker. We had 2,000 citizens in a square in town. We had people like Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland, champion of women's rights. This year, we are just coming 2 days ago from, again, another very successful National Citizens Convention where we were asking 3 questions. How do we build an inclusive economy? How do we place citizens at the center of governance and politics? And how do we build a new social contract that can engender healing, social cohesion, and enduring peace and prosperity for our communities and for our country? So I am going to leave it here. I was going to talk about our context being a country that is ruled by a former liberation movement, but I know the opportunity might come at another point. For now, let me leave my experience sharing here in the hope that there will be an opportunity for us to continue, this discussion. Maibuye, Africa. Maibuye, Africa. Amandla, awe too. Thank you.